Hello everyone. Today's lecture is going to cover the ethical standards that you need to be aware of as a component of technical communication. So in order to talk about the ethical standards, we need to come to an understanding of what ethics is. And so a formal definition of ethics is the study of principles of conduct that apply to an individual or group. So basically, it's looking at what values, what beliefs you have as either an individual, personal, or as a group, as in a corporation or a business. What ethics do you have? What seems ethical to you, and what seems unethical to you? And the same thing with business. What is ethical business practice, and what is an unethical business practice? So we have standards in the workplace that we use to deal with ethical dilemmas. And so rights is the first one. And that means the individual's basic needs and welfare. So are the individual's rights being impinged on in some way? If so, then it would be an unethical occurrence. With justice, we look at how the costs and benefits of an action or of a policy can be distributed fairly among a group. So is it just for all? Is it fair to everyone that's involved or will be impacted by a particular ethical decision or choice? And then utility, and that's the positive and negative effects that an action or a policy has on the public. So how positive is the impact going to be? If so, then it's an ethical decision. But if there are going to be some negative consequences, then you're starting to look at the ethical, you're moving closer to the non-ethical, and you need to look at those effects and see. Again, are they going to be justly distributed? Is it only one group that's going to get the negative consequences, or is it going to be fairly, the consequence is going to impact everyone in a similar way? And then care. Care is the relationship we have with other individuals. Is the decision or the issue going to impact our relationships with others, whether it be business, clients? So in what way is this decision going to impact those people that we're working with? And we have to look at that again. There's positive and negative impacts, and are those impacts fairly distributed, and are they still meeting the individual's basic needs and welfare? So you can see that all of these are interdependent. They don't work. It's not just one aspect of making decision if something is ethical or unethical. You're looking at these and using all of these to determine the ethicalness of a particular issue or problem. So what ethical obligations do you have in the workplace? You have an ethical obligation to your employer. When you are hired, you frequently will have standards that you need to adhere to. So you have obligations that you agree to by just being hired to follow. You may have ethical obligations to the public to represent your company in a positive but yet honest way. And you also have ethical obligations to the environment, and that can be two different kinds of environment. That can be your workplace itself, and then it can be outside of the workplace. If you, for example, know that your company is dumping illegal waste into the Pagan River, then you have an ethical obligation to the environment and to the public to notify them. And so you can see just by that example that these can overlap, and sometimes they can conflict. So let's talk about your obligations to your employer. When you are hired, you have guaranteed to your employer that everything on your resume is true, that you have honestly and fairly represented your skills and abilities. So you owe your employer, or you are obliged to be competent and to be diligent. So you need to be able to do what you said you can do, and you need to be able to work hard doing it. You also have an obligation to be honest and candid with your employer. So, and that can be kind of, when you're talking to someone who is in your boss, you have to be very careful about what you can be honest about and candid about. You have an obligation to be confidential. For example, at Thomas Nelson, as an instructor, I have a obligation to keep your grades, how you're doing in the course, confidential. I can't go and, talk to somebody and say, hey, John Smith, he's failing my class. I can't do that. I have to keep that kind of thing to myself. And you also have an obligation to your employer to be loyal. You need to keep your negativity and your frustration out of the public view. So there are several bodies of law that have to do with technical communication. Probably the one, well, I think all of these are pretty important. Copyright law, trademark law, contract law, and liability law. Copyright law, and we'll go into that in more depth, but that has to do with use. Do you have the right to use a particular thing? Trademark, again, is it does it have the trademark symbol? Does that trade mark belong to someone so that you can't use it? Contract law, what are you contractually obligated to do or to follow? And then liability, how liable are you or your corporation for damages or for something to go wrong? So one of the most important things that we use in academia and that you need to be aware of is what is called fair use. And again, this is under copyright law. And fair use is the purpose and character of the use, especially whether the use is for profit. So for example, because I use educational materials, I may get them from one of my colleagues, and if my colleague gives me permission to, I can change, edit, whatever, but I have to do that only if I have permission, and I'm using it for nonprofit, for educational purposes. The nature and purpose of the copyrighted work. So for example, if I wanted to put a portion of a textbook into the course, if I wanted to copy it and put a portion in there and make that available, I could only do so if I have permission from the author. And if I don't have permission from the author, I may still be able to do so according to what kind of copyright the material has, as long as it's a very minimal amount. So it's like, no more than a quarter of the textbook could I put in. And then and this is important for anybody that has copyrighted material, is my use of it or how I use something going to impact whether somebody's going to buy the book or in some way impinge upon the profits of the book. And so those are all concepts that you need to consider when you're using material that is not yours. Again, when using material from other sources, abide by the fair use concept. Seek permission. Always ask if you can. Sometimes you can't. And that's why this third step is so important. Cite your sources accurately. You have an ethical obligation to give credit where credit is due. You are responsible for doing so anytime you use something that is not your own. Be sure, if you have questions about authorship, if you have questions about citations, what you should cite, what you shouldn't cite, ask me. If you're in the workplace, ask the people that you're working with. Ask your boss. Some larger corporations have legal counsel, you might ask them. But what you want to do is basically protect yourself. You want to make sure that you are representing material in a way that you're not going to be called into the boss's office and yelled at because you've done something incorrectly or unfairly. Whoops, that's going crazy. Let me go back there. Organization culture. This is also a really huge part of ethics in the workplace, and that is that your leadership is ethical. We talk about trickle-down economics. Well, there's trickle-down ethical beliefs as well. If your leadership, if the people in charge are ethical people, then it's quite likely that the entire company, organization is going to have ethical principles. If your supervisor reinforces those ethical principles, if your colleagues are committed to those ethical principles, if those principles and values are embedded in the culture, then it's going to be very easy to be ethical. It's when you have those people that are kind of borderline or going back and forth, and it can be a fine line. It can be a fine line between a business or an organization's survival and its responsibility to the public. So think back to those principles that we talked about at the beginning of dealing with ethical dilemmas. Most businesses or corporations, in the college, most places that hospitals interact with have some sort of code of conduct that the employees are expected to follow and adhere to. And this code of conduct should protect the interest of the public rather than the interest of the members of the organization or profession. It should be specific and comprehensive, and it must be enforceable. You can have the best code of conduct, but if you can't enforce it, then it really isn't a very good code of conduct. So it also needs to be specific and comprehensive. So it needs to be about specific things, but it also needs to be well-rounded, I guess, so that it covers all aspects. I'll give you an example of a code of conduct. I used to be a faculty at Old Dominion University, and at Old Dominion University, when you sign your contract, one of the things that's in your contract says that you cannot, if you're arrested for drinking, or if you get a DUI, you will, that is grounds for dismissal. So the college, or the university rather, Old Dominion, has made that a DUI is getting a DUI means that you have broken the code of conduct. You are supposed to conduct yourself in such a manner that that would not be a problem or an issue. A similar thing is dating students. Professors are strictly forbidden to date their students, and you can see why that could be problematic on so many different levels. You never want to use your power or as a way to coerce people to do things, so it can be quite problematic. Another point to consider is that different cultures have different values. So when you're communicating across cultures, you want to make sure that your communication is clear and understandable to the target audience. So whoever is going to be reading your materials, you have an ethical obligation to make sure that that information will be clear to that audience. Again, think back to those manuals that you get for like televisions and how to work a television or set up a TV. You have the diagrams, and often they're printed in several different languages, so that somebody in Germany can set up the TV just as easily as somebody in the United States or in Japan. You're also ethically obligated not to reinforce patterns of discrimination in product information. So in other words, you want to avoid any kind of discriminatory language in the information that you're conveying. You don't want, or discriminatory images for that matter. You just don't want to set yourself up to so that somebody can criticize you for how you've represented information. You are not obligated to challenge the prevailing prejudice directly. So in other words, if you don't have to be a champion for women's rights, however, you don't want to promote patriarchy. So you don't have to be pro women's rights, but you need to be neutral, basically, is the best way of putting it or explaining it. So here are some of the most important principles of ethical communication. Abide by the relevant laws, by the laws that pertain to what you are doing. Abide by the appropriate professional code of conduct. So whatever is considered the code of conduct in your place of work, you are to abide by that. You should take advantage of your employer's ethics resources. Frequently there's a whole, whether it be online or library, of information about ethical behaviors, expectations, and so forth. Tell the truth. Be honest. Don't mislead people. Don't mislead your readers. Just be straightforward and to the point. Use design to highlight important ethical and legal information. So for example, you all have seen like the when you see the red sign that says stop, you know that you're supposed to stop. So when you see that in a document, you know that, oh, I need to stop. Or if you see a warning in red, that draws attention to the fact that you need to pay attention to this particular information and read it carefully and make sure that you follow the steps that you need to follow. The other thing, and this may not sound like it's ethical, but it really is, because you certainly can make things very muddy and unclear and confusing. So you really want to make sure the information is straight to the point, it's easily understood, people can't confuse your meaning. Again, you want to avoid any discriminatory language. Sexism is a big one that we'll talk about in this class, because that's what really mostly pertains to what we're doing. And you also want to acknowledge assistance from others. Anytime someone has helped you create something or work on a project or somehow been involved, you've gotten information from others, you want to make sure that you acknowledge that you got the information from them. Otherwise, you're not really presenting yourself in an ethical, honest manner. So, with the laws governing intellectual property, don't plagiarize. Honor the laws regarding trademarks. Always know the trademark law. Look it up. Find it out. It's pretty easy, as you all know, to find just about anything you need to find out about or know about online. So make sure you look up the trademark rules and laws for a particular product. Live up to the express and implied warranties of your company's products. So if your company is selling something and it has a year warranty and something goes on within that year, don't try to lollygag so that the year is up and you're no longer responsible, but make sure that you take care of whatever issues arise as in a timely and direct manner. And again, abide by all the laws governing product liability. So if a product can in some way injure people or hurt people, you need to make sure that that information is conveyed clearly. again, this one seems obvious, but it's actually easier to do than you think. So in order to be ethical, you want to avoid false implications. So don't make something seem like it's a possibility when it really isn't a possibility. Don't exaggerate. Don't exaggerate the importance of something. Just tell the truth. Follow the legalistic, or watch your legalistic constructions so that they make sense. So if you're using legal terms, make sure that those legal terms make sense. And you also want to avoid using euphemisms, because euphemisms can be misunderstood. Excuse me. So you want to make sure that you're very clear, very precise, very exact in the information that you provide others. So that comes to the end. If you have any questions, you can post them in the I Have a Question forum, or you can email me directly. Enjoy!